Hello and welcome to episode 99 of our SAP on Azure video podcast. Today is June 29th, and together with Robert and Goran, we're here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
So a lot of customers are running SAP on Azure. A lot of customers are using the SAP Business Technology Platform to create extensions for the SAP solutions, especially S/4HANA. Since BTP, the Business Technology Platform, can run on Azure, and the SAP system can run on Azure. So why do you actually need an SAP connector? Why do you need to open up ports in your firewall? Even if, as mentioned, both of these systems can run on Azure. Well, that's exactly what SAP Private Link helps you with, basically. So it's no longer required to open up firewall ports. If you have your SAP system running on Azure, if you have your SAP Business Technology Platform running on Azure, now you can have this secure connectivity between both environments. To give us more insights on this, Sven Kohlhaas from SAP and Martin Pankraz from Microsoft join us today and show us how this setup actually works. But before we hand over to them, as always, let's quickly take a look at some of the news from this week. And Goran, last minute you pulled up, or you brought up this SAP Automation Framework updates. So maybe.
So we already had Kimo Force, a colleague of mine who is basically lead here in open source automation, and nice is just the latest updates, so to say. So where we get the Oracle support on Linux at the moment, so meaning not just a standalone but also high availability Oracle Data Guard, which is officially HA supported in Azure, as well as share home installation and multi-sit. Then also the Azure NetApp files for the HANA. You can a bit scroll down for SAP MNT user sub files as well, again Linux, and also Azure file for NFS. So that's also kind of quite popular because it's zonal redundant as well, and some general improvements. So I think that's a really a nice progress, and everybody can just try out the newest stuff. So Oracle is basically I've seen personally used a lot as well. So definitely it will help uncover some higher percentage of customers in Azure.
And just to put this again quickly into perspective, this is now part of our SDAF, the SAP Deployment Automation Framework. So as you said, we had Kimo on the show before, and the SDAF, the SAP Deployment Automation Framework, is basically a tool set that allows you to install the infrastructure on Azure, but then also deploy an SAP system. And that's exactly what you meant, the Oracle deployment. So the Oracle deployment can now also be automated. We are using Azure, or we can now use Azure NetApp files for the setup, Azure files for the setup, and that's where within a few clicks, basically, or scripts, you can now install an SAP system also using these technology components. Cool. Great. It's really amazing how much updates are happening here with SDAF all the time, and it's definitely worth to call out some of the new releases here. Then another quick update or announcement, Microsoft Inspire. I think we might have mentioned this before briefly, but I just saw this in my Twitter feed basically. So Microsoft Inspire will happen in roughly a month from now, so from July 19th, July 20th, Microsoft Inspire takes place again. So this is basically our partner event, right? Where we work with partners, where we showcase solutions from partners with partners. So if you are a Microsoft partner, it's definitely worth to check out, sign up for Microsoft Inspire, and learn some new cool, interesting things in the Microsoft world. And speaking of new cool things, SAP Private Link is our topic today. So maybe before we go into the topic itself, maybe Sven, maybe you can start introducing yourself, what you're doing at SAP. And then also Martin, well, everyone knows you, but still maybe you can introduce yourself again. So Sven, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Holger. So My name is Sven Kohlhaas, which you also see here on the slide. I'm currently in the role of a development manager as part of our runtime and foundation area, responsible for SAP Private Link service as one of the services, but also for certain Cloud Foundry teams. Yeah, I would say then let's talk about SAP Private Link service and the big news here, which are SAP Private Link service on Azure is now generally available. Exactly since last week, Wednesday, it is in GA. So now it's available for productive use. I think a number of customers have waited for that, have tried it out during the beta, which we had actually now running since also roughly a year, where we over time delivered additional innovations. Also, Martin, I know, did quite a bunch of a blog post series there with a number of innovations that came out over time. And yeah, now we are GA. Now I would say the actual business begins.
And I think that was really actually pretty nice. It was a great journey from the initial inception of the beta, where we had some obviously limited functionalities, and then over time, and also looking at the feedback from the customers, the beta grew and grew, and additional features and functionalities were introduced. And now it's really great to see this service as a GA service.
Yeah, totally. So for me, it's even a much longer journey. I think like 2.5 years ago, we started having conversations amongst others with you and other Microsoft folks about the topic of private connectivity. And yeah, out of those conversations and also the joint innovations between SAP and Microsoft, this was, I would say, one of the topics that came out of that, starting very small as an MVP, so minimum viable product with a very small scope, into a beta, then during the beta extending that. And now that we have, I would say, one of the big scenarios supported, and then also all the enterprise readiness qualities that you expect from an SAP cloud service. Now we are GA, but also we'll continue to continuously work and innovate on that service, supporting more scenarios, services, etc.
I actually think you mentioned something really, really interesting, because I still remember when we talked about where customers had the Business Technology Platform, and they had obviously the Business Technology Platform then on Azure, and they had an SAP system on Azure. And the first question was, well, I have already an express route connectivity from my internal network or from my on-premises network, and can I use express route to connect this not only to my SAP on Azure system, but also to the Business Technology Platform? And I remember we had released a blog post actually that talks about these setups, how can I actually have a secure connectivity from my on-premise environment into BTP. And this private link service now is basically just the next step to really say, well, I'll leave you to explain what the SAP Private Link service actually is. But that, for me, it's a beautiful story with a long history, as you said. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And we are getting requests, especially from a number of huge customers who are getting the question from their security departments: please avoid public internet connectivity and put those connections, especially between such oftentimes very sensitive systems, business critical system, put them on a private network. And as SAP Private Link service, in essence, leverages Microsoft Azure Private Link. So Microsoft Azure Private Link is, you could say, our data plane that we are just reusing. And then we have our own control plane and integration into BTP, written that on one side orchestrates the whole setup of private endpoints, etc., but also takes care about the integration and security, so that, let's say, your customer application as part of Cloud Foundry runtime can access your private endpoint, but the customer application of a different customer cannot access that same private endpoint. And then to the main achievements, or why should you use SAP Private Link service? It's you avoid on one side public endpoints, but then also data transfer over public internet. So really you get the guarantee that you stay in the backbone network of And that's guarantee is, it you can say, pacifies a lot of the security department folks.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I guess when that should also mean a better performance in connection. If you go through the backbone versus over public internet, in a performance context should be better, right? Much better.
Yes, exactly. So that's also a point which we always get question, hey, does this give me a better performance? And we did certain measurements there. In general, I would say the answer is yes, but also it depends on the scenarios. So also what we are now supporting with the GA are actually cross-region private links.
Okay.
And
okay.
for such scenarios, it's then the performance becomes much bigger part. So we had one SAP internal scenario where we had discussions. They had their database, I think, running in Paris for some reason, or somewhere in France, and then the application was running in Germany in Frankfurt, and for that connectivity, they wanted to leverage then Private Link.
Okay.
So those scenarios are perhaps a bit specific, but there you get also some, let's say, more performance gains. If it's the same region or even the same availability zone, then I think the performance gains are not the key focus. So our main value proposition is the security aspect. I would say performance or possibly also price, depending on what exactly your scenario and its throughput is. Those are, can be additional benefits. Yeah, perhaps speaking a bit more about the scenarios. So what we now support with the GA is here that scenario one, the classical scenario. I have for example, S4 system on Azure, and then I extend that on BTP. In Cloud Foundry runtime, and then have here my private endpoint, which connects to a load balancer. Behind that load balancer is a VM, and then on that VM, there might be the S4 system running, but there might be also any other third-party system running on there. And then another,
Sorry, and I guess this is probably one of the most used scenarios. I guess if you think of keep the core clean, don't do any developments in your SAP system, but use the Business Technology Platform to build extensions, to build new applications. I think that's exactly where you need this connectivity between your SAP system, where you need to have access to your SAP system, and you build, like I said, a new application on the Business Technology Platform and access your S4 system via this private link connectivity here.
Yes, exactly. Definitely the most requested scenario, especially then there are some, I would say, sub-scenarios within there, which we in part support, but also in part not yet support. Those together definitely is the most important. Yeah, keep the core clean, extensions and integrations on SAP Business Technology Platform. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
And then the second scenario, which we also already support, are those Azure native services, or at least the first of those, and more are also in the works. Also, if customers would have a specific request, hey, I need this Azure native service, which is supported by Azure Private Link, but not yet by SAP Private Link. It's also always on our side a topic of capacity and prioritizing, validating those services. And so there we have started with MariaDB and MySQL, but others are also then in the pipeline and will be added in the future. And
so just to expand on this, so if let's say if I want to build now a CAP application, so following the cloud application programming model, and I want to use a MariaDB on Azure, then in the past what I needed to do is I would obviously spin up a MariaDB on Azure. I would have a public endpoint, and I would then connect my CAP application running on BTP to this public endpoint from MariaDB. Obviously, I could use authentication and everything, but that would be the communication channel. And now with Private Link, what I can do is I can expose the endpoint of MariaDB via a private IP address into the Business Technology Platform, so that my CAP application doesn't need to call this public endpoint. So maybe I don't even have a public endpoint for my MariaDB anymore, but I can still connect from this CAP application to the service on Azure.
Yes, that's exactly like here one of the first of the big features here. You don't need those public endpoints anymore. If there is a public endpoint, yes, you can. Usually, you can also secure it depending on which service is behind it. But thinking about some specific services like Kafka or also some applications, they have problems with securing endpoints. But also, if it's a public endpoint, even if it's secured, there can be DDoS attacks, etc. on those. And just not having those public endpoints removes one attack vector.
Yeah. Cool.
Exactly. Speaking a bit more about scenarios, I have here one slide with a number of scenarios. Also, don't be overwhelmed by that. We can go through them one by one, and then depending talk about those. So I also marked them supported or roadmap. Starting with the supported scenarios, and many of them are similar, so you will grasp them very quickly. As we just talked about the topic of Azure native services like MariaDB, that is a scenario which is supported. Whereas here the list of services is startingly small, but can also or will be extended over time. The next scenario is the S/4HANA scenario, which we also discussed first. So you have here the load balancer, which you're connecting to, and behind that is a VM where your S/4HANA system or SAP ERP system, etc., might run on. And then scenario 1.3 and 1.4 are more or less just different versions of this scenario. So you don't have on the VM the S/4HANA system running, but you have a third-party system running on there. Or you have a custom service that you wrote yourself running there, which you're connecting to. So those are just variations of that first one. And then the 1.5 is a bit is a scenario which is also highly requested actually, but which is working a bit differently because you are then talking here about the reverse direction. So we'll see the endpoint is now on the right side, and on the left side is the private link service.
Which I think
you go ahead, Holger. So we are discussing that because of the difference in concept even, yeah. Since the private link is a layer 4 device and Cloud Connector has application layer specifics, there's merit in combining those. So that's I think the audit logging is one of the things that we discussed also in my blog series, as well as RFC path allow listings. Yeah. So these kind of things make sense to combine in this manner.
Exactly. So with private link, we really want to focus on the layer 4 connectivity. So not going into those level 7 features. And therefore looking now at also bringing Cloud Connector into the mix on one side for the additional functionality it provides, but also potentially customers who have Cloud Connector already running today might not want to switch it off, but rather just lift it on private link. For that scenario, so this is a roadmap item which we are currently heavily discussing also with the connectivity service and Cloud Connector team, how we can best make that happen. But we'll take a bit of time as it's different approach with the reverse direction. So we don't on private link side don't manage the private endpoints anymore, but rather the private link service. So it looks like it looks a bit different.
But I think for me, that is also a really, really interesting scenario because, I mean, so far, everyone has been using the SAP Cloud Connector. And actually, I'm personally a huge fan of the SAP Cloud Connector because it really helps me bridge this firewall gap that I guess all the customers have that want to connect their SAP system to the Business Technology Platform. And the SAP Cloud Connector has a lot of fantastic features that help me to really limit and restrict and control access from the Business Technology Platform to my SAP system. So I think that's really, really fantastic. What you just said, I think that's really this interesting thing that customers that need this functionality in the SAP Cloud Connector, that they can still use it in the future, but they can make the connection even more secure by leveraging the SAP Private Link connectivity. So one thing that I often hear when I talk to customers, where do I actually install the SAP Cloud Connector? Because obviously this system where the SAP Cloud Connector runs on needs to have access to the internet. And a lot of SAP systems don't have access to the internet. So where do I install it? And now if we combine Private Link with the SAP Cloud Connector, that's no longer a question. Then SAP Cloud Connector can connect to BTP without the requirement to open up outbound communications. And I think that's another beautiful thing where we can increase the security even further than what is already available with the SAP Cloud Connector.
Yes, totally agreed. Like all those threat modeling workshops, they are always tiresome and take a lot of time and energy. Making those easier, that's the goal.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, what I see that you have in the roadmap in general, ability to connect in both directions, which depends then on the scenario, right? So might even the right side would love to connect to the BTP or other way around. So you still can do it through the secure and easy way through the private link.
Exactly. So as let's say it's different if you have a VNet peering that works a bit different. So you have directly, let's say, both directions supported. With private link, how the service works, it's just a bit different. It only has one direction. So now let's say one of our big ticket items is supporting the reverse direction, as we call it, and piloting that is Cloud Connector, and then also here scenario 2 or 3 looking at HANA Cloud. So we also have a lot of requests of customers that want to connect to their HANA Cloud system. So having HANA Cloud here as the target. And then usually the scenario is I want to, from my Azure subscription, my own Azure subscription, want to connect to the HANA Cloud system to get whatever, to access certain data. It might be for analytics or other reporting purposes. That's the, let's say, mainly requested here. But you can also do the, once this is supported, there's not that far a path of also having then possibly different BTP services also over Private Link. Or as I had it marked here also, the whole RISE with SAP topic. That is exactly also where SAP Private Link plays in very well. And we are in tight discussions here with the RISE with SAP folks. That we also make SAP Private Link service here a standard once the scenarios are then actually all supported, or the most important scenarios are supported, that you also get that more or less out of the box, then also your BTP for the extensions and integrations connected with your Azure subscription.
And I actually think, I mean, as mentioned, I think the starting point is really this: you have your S4 system and you want to build these extend and innovate scenarios in BTP. But what I also see more and more coming, I mean, the business technology platform is all about business services. So one of my favorite services at the moment that I, when I talk to customers and partners, is this taxation service, for example, on the business technology platform. And exactly what you depicted here in scenario 2, if now I have a possibility to consume this taxation service in a very secure manner, that I don't need to open up anything on my network on Azure, because I'm developing an application there and I have this private connectivity to the taxation service on BTP. And just as one example, obviously there are multiple others services on BTP, then all of a sudden I can consume these services again in a private way without the need and requirement for me on the Azure side to open up firewall ports. And I think that's the whole approach that we're taking here with SAP Private Link, is that we make the whole infrastructure much more secure.
Yes, exactly. And leveraging those, I would say, industry-specific services are also oftentimes services higher up the chain, which is often a sweet spot for SAP, making those services more accessible so that they really can be used in many more scenarios. That's, I think, in here a good point, and also about the joint innovation. So bringing that both companies bring to the table what is each of their sweet spots. And it might be for SAP oftentimes a bit more in the higher level services, like such a taxation service. And for example, with Azure, a lot of the scale and then also the underlying Azure Private Link service, the whole plumbing, which we are reusing for the data plane on our side with SAP Private Link service as well. I think that is a key point.
Cool. Yeah, great.
So from my side, I would be through with those questions. If people want to reach out to me, you can do that. Twitter, just at Sven Kohlhaas, or also you will find me on the various SAP sites.
Absolutely. So we'll definitely have all the links again in the show notes where people can reach you. Thank you. So that was a fantastic overview, or not only an overview, but also some examples what you can do with Private Link. But maybe now, since this is a GA service, maybe now we can also see it in action. So Martin, again, maybe 30 seconds. Who are you? And then show us what you can do with Private Link.
My pleasure. Yeah, Martin Pankraz. I'm a colleague of Holger, same team within the product management organization for SAP at Microsoft. Yeah, so we look at the whole integration portfolio across the board. Yeah, from Power Platform into the other integration points of BTP, as well as every interface you can think of that SAP has. Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. So before we go there, let me say, Sven, it has been a pleasure to work with your team on this in the co-development fashion. Quite insightful and quite like energizing as well. Yeah? So it was a great journey to get here.
Yes, definitely, and a lot of learnings, I think, on both sides, and that's also key. When working together, you always try to learn from each other.
So the Private Link journey starts here in the Business Technology Platform. So I'm in one of my sub accounts, and from here you can start creating them. And since last week, the plans changed from beta to standard, and we can actually then start creating the instance if your session is not expired.
So while you're refreshing the session, you're now in the SAP Business Technology Platform cockpit, basically. So what you've already done, you have created obviously the sub account and everything, and you have the quota assigned that exactly. You are able to see the Private Link service.
Yeah, and let me drop this one. I already deleted the one on the Azure side, so that we can see the binding journey in action again. Yeah. So let me quickly delete the part on the BTP side so that we can start from scratch. So this is like the cleanup process now. Yeah. So I have a binding to the link service, and now I can get rid of it.
Perfect. So, and then the starting point or the scenario that we want to show us is, I think, what Sven had as scenario 1, where you have an instance running on Azure, and now you want to connect to this instance via the Business Technology Platform.
Yes, but actually I have a small teaser for the next blog post that Harut will be publishing next, and that will be about integration suite. Yeah, so we have one of the most sought after services on BTP, actually connecting through the Cloud Foundry app router to the S4 system. Yeah, so not a CAP application or anything like you mentioned today, but really an iFlow, which is a very common scenario to integrate any of the SaaS apps from the SAP portfolio.
So really cool. So I think the integration suite is one of the most used applications on the Business Technology Platform. So connecting SAP to other SAP systems, SAP to non-SAP systems. You mentioned the iFlows, so the huge catalog that SAP provides with the content. And now what you're saying is that instead of accessing a public endpoint or to have a reverse proxy in place or the SAP Cloud Connector to connect to my S4 system, I can use Private Link to have this connectivity.
Exactly, yeah, and the blog I posted in the series like last year already, that used a custom app at this point here, but in the meantime, working with Sven's team, we enabled the Cloud Foundry app router to actually take the same responsibility now, so it has the same feature capabilities. And as of the latest release. I think I mentioned it here, 11.2.1. Yeah, we'll see that on the Business Application Studio. You can actually really use that end-to-end. Yeah.
But that's really cool. So it's another example of what Sven mentioned, looking back at this history that we have, where we continuously improved the scenario. You published this blog post a year ago. There, some workarounds were required. Now, this is part of the, or much easier as part of the new product, basically.
Exactly. So, and the name I need to look up so that it matches once I'm on in here.
Okay, now we're
since
in
I'm
Business
deploying
Application
manually.
Studio.
Yeah, exactly. So which name did I use? There it is. So I'm making sure that I have a match now with the instance I'm deploying and the one that will be linked from the from the So at this point, I require a resource ID, and this is where the handshake happens now, no? between Azure on the customer subscription side and the SAP BTP side. So when I move now into my Azure subscription, I'm here in the Private Link Center where the Private Link service lives. And this one is connected with my load balancer. Yeah, so I have an internal load balancer deployed, as we see here in the drawing. Yeah, we are looking at this load balancer here that is connected to the Private Link service that I will now allow to have communication.
So you're also highly available now, right?
Well, it's a managed service, go on, yeah. So
yes.
The whole thing is a managed service.
It has to be, yes.
Yeah, so when we go in here, actually here on the overview side, the easiest way to get the ID that you need is to get into the JSON view and copy the resource ID from here. Yeah. So then you get the whole thing that you need. The SAP resource here only comes into play for Maria and MySQL at this point, yeah, where you need to classify this. Yeah, and there's also the link where SAP gives you some hints how this would look like. And then here you put something nice.
Because this is a handshake process, right? I mean, it is important that BTP can request a private link, but then the SAP colleague basically goes via BTP and says, I would like to establish this private link, but then it's not there out of the box. On the Microsoft side, someone needs to approve it now.
Exactly, yeah. So I will now kick off this request. And this sends the request here to the endpoint connections. Yeah. Takes a couple of seconds. And one more thing that I want to mention at this point, there's multiple ways to manage access security for this. Yeah. I have RBAC configured, meaning my user has the capability to allow this, but we also have customers with tighter policies. And they have, for instance, this feature here, restricted by subscription. But that requires to get the subscription ID from SAP. Yeah? And at the moment, the process for that is opening a support ticket, right, Sven?
Yes, exactly. So that's quite a specific thing yet. They are, it's a one-on-one approach that needs to happen so far.
Yeah, but it's a sensitive info. Yeah, it makes total sense to have a secure channel to share it.
Yeah. And the component for Private Link is BCCP Private Link, so quite easy to remember.
Great, yeah. So we see here the pending state. We have here the welcome message. And, from here, if I'm allowed now to approve, I can actually establish the link.
Perfect. Okay.
So this is the first challenge that some of the customers have, to bridge the different departments, to get everyone on board, to finally click the button here.
Yeah, exactly. So for us now, it's like a development account, so you have access to both, but especially for the productive systems, this oftentimes might be different departments who on work on either side, on the BTP cockpit side or here in the Microsoft Azure portal. So that's also one point here to definitely be aware of, that this needs to be approved, just also so not that anyone just can open up the connection.
Yeah,
of course.
there,
Yeah.
There we go. Link established. When we go back here with the next refresh, this will also go away. Yeah, the creation button here. But there we go. Yeah. But in order to actually finish the handshake, we need at least one bound application. Otherwise, we have the plumbing in place, but the link is not fully live. Yeah. So, and we need the app router anyways. So this is the code that I have here for the app router, and it really has only the package JSON, which tells us we are going to use SAP's standard app router library. And other than that, there's only one route configured, which targets my SAP OData service. Yeah? And in here, I have the one destination configured that holds the information where to find the S4 system. Yeah? All right. So when I go in here, I still need to deploy this, and I actually see I made another change that I will have to talk with Harut next time before he publishes. See if I remember this correctly. I haven't tested that part before yet. But from here we can now create, or maybe I can deploy the last one. It's easiest.
So you have the app router here open in the Business Application Studio, but it's not yet deployed to BTP. So that's what you need to do now. You need to authenticate and then deploy the application from the Business Application Studio to the BTP environment, basically, so that once it is deployed, you can continue with the binding from Private Link, and then you finally have the setup complete, basically.
Yes, so we see now the MTA process kicking off here, doing my deployment. I have the term here right. Happens when you reverse engineer before a demo, yeah?
Yeah, you know, like the live debugging is always the most interesting.
Docs. Also not here. I think I remember correctly.
I mean, we'll see it. You are deploying it.
Yeah, still a couple of steps to go, but there it is. So the first thing we'll see, we have then when this refreshes the bound application.
Because you have specified the name in the app router.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. When we can go back, we see this on the MTA YAML file.
Yeah.
There we have the dependencies, and the Private Link dependencies here listed at this one.
Perfect. So that's why it's showing up there in Private Link.
Exactly. And from here, we will find the credentials now. Yeah. So once you have the first application bound, you can actually see here the host names that SAP generated for this endpoint. And there are two different ones to give you most flexibility when you create certificates for the SSL connections.
Great, yeah.
So in our case, we'll use this one. And I'm now in the destination setup for the same app.
Mm-hmm.
I will need to edit this now because we have a new private link. And this is really just this path now. Yeah.
So this destination now points to via the app router to your SAP system via the private link connectivity.
Well, the app router is configured to point to this destination. Yeah.
Yes, and in the destination we have the endpoint, the private link endpoint, basically of our load balancer. To be clear, to be very very strict, right? Because the load balancer is the endpoint that is exposed via private link, and the load balancer then on Azure points to our SAP system.
Yes. And the destination service has also this new proxy type. Yeah, this has been established.
Ah, nice. Yeah.
Couple of weeks back. Yeah.
That's actually really interesting. Yeah, because so far the proxy type we had internet facing, which was any public facing IP address basically. Then we had on-premise, which was basically the connectivity via the SAP Cloud Connector.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have private link as a third option. Cool.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think that's something that we did with the connectivity team sometime in December or so. Might have been their release, might have been also in January, but somewhere around the time. And what is not yet, or what does not yet work, is like test connection, which you might know from some other scenarios. So that is something which is, let's say, not yet implemented as part of the connectivity or destination service here. But it's also something we are looking at of extending how different other services within SAP support SAP Private Link service. That's always then a conversation between different teams. And that's also, so if customers are requesting certain features or additional services which are not yet supported, if we get that information, for example, via a support ticket, then we will leverage that also and go in discussion with the respective teams to prioritize which services should be supported by SAP Private Link service next.
Cool. But that's really cool, especially now since the destination service is a very central piece of BTP, I think, and with the support of Private Link there, I think this opens up a completely a huge range of applications that can benefit from Private Link.
That's exactly it. So we have the application bound, destination set up. I already navigated to the app router. So this is the URL that integration suite will now need. Yeah. So I'm quickly navigating there. But we can already test if the app router is doing something if we want. I go into Postman. So here, let's see if that's the same link. Should be. Yeah.
That's the famous GW samples basic service, the OData service.
Exactly. So, and in order to call this app router here, I've been playing with authentication types, and once Harut publishes this block, the other one will work as well. Yeah. So, but in order to make it easy at this point, I will do the basic auth, which we configured here as well. Yeah, that's the switch that I made. So let me quickly get the credentials, and then have the kickoff.
Cool, but so now we are calling the GW sample service, which is running on the SAP system, which is on Azure, but behind a firewall. So this is not the public endpoint. But unlike in the past, where we then probably would have used the SAP Cloud Connector to connect the SAP system to the destination service on BTP, we have now the connectivity via Private Link. So the destination service use the proxy type Private Link. Then we have the app router that uses the destination service. And now you're calling the app router URL with the GW sample basic OData service. And hopefully we'll see some OData results in a second.
Exactly, yeah. So jumping here to integration suite.
And I think one key piece, which is also sometimes the questions from customer, okay, when do I need SAP Private Link service? And I would say most simplest answer to that is if you want to connect systems which are running in different Azure subscriptions, or in this case, the S/4HANA system where the OData service lives, that is running in the Azure subscription owned by Microsoft, owned by Martin. And then the SAP Integration Suite, obviously, as it's a fully managed service, that is managed and owned by SAP, running in Azure subscription, which is owned by SAP. So you have here Azure subscriptions of different owners. And that is exactly the case where, like, for example, a VNet peering or something like that just wouldn't work. Also because of the multi-tenant architecture of BTP. But where then Private Link has exactly the sweet spot.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah. So here's my iFlow, where we have an HTTP inbound and the OData request that we're actually going to fire. Yeah. Since this is the goal of the integration developer in here. Yeah? He doesn't need to know anything other than that. Yeah. So he gets the app router URL, he knows his OData service, and at that point he can already do the discovery. Yeah. So I did this before our recording. Yeah. And I already got the metadata pool and set up the OData connector. So the URL didn't change. Here's the authentication that I put. Proxy type here didn't change yet. Yeah, it's still internet, but still the proxy type is a little misleading, but it really goes through the private link, yeah, on the router side. So, and this path, we'll see if that works.
Okay.
So we'll see from yesterday my request likely. Oh, there we go. Yeah. And for today,
from Postman, you're now calling the endpoint from the integration suite.
Yes.
And fetching the top 10 or not.
Yeah, so let's see, unauthorized. Okay, the token has expired. Yeah, for the iFlow, I have configured OAuth. Yeah, so I need to get a new access token. Use this one.
That's just the authentication to the iFlow, to the integration suite.
Yes. Yeah. So now. Yeah, exactly. Try again. And it seems I messed with the basic out.
The call is here, and theoretically the call would now. So actually, the authentication is going through to the SAP system.
No, it fails on the app router.
It fails already on the app router. Okay.
Yeah, because I messed with this setting here.
Ah, okay.
There's likely a different representation of this.
But Harut is going to publish his blog post, and then we'll have the whole end-to-end story working again. And I think you showed all the important pieces. We just need to fix here the authentication type, and then the end-to-end flow should also work.
This is what always happens. If you have a working setup, you break it again so you can show how it works, and then you missed one step.
No problem. We saw that it worked yesterday, so that's good. So the end-to-end flow is working. And again, the full documentation is currently being prepared and released very soon.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, fantastic. I think that was a really nice walkthrough from the early beginnings, Sven. Like even way before we started our first discussions on Private Link, to all these small enhancements that we did throughout the year, throughout the whole beta program, which has been around for quite some time, and now with GA, with a beautiful flow with approval workflows that are required to set up the trust between the Business Technology Platform and the Azure subscription, and then to an, well, almost working integration flow scenario.
Exactly. So thanks a lot for the opportunity to also talk a bit here about SAP Private Link Service, our GA, and then also to all the customers and partners. You can also expect that journey to continue. So I'm a huge fan of the theory of marginal gains, if you might be familiar with that. So we are doing releases on a bi-weekly basis. If we improve every day by 1%, you will see a lot of improvement over the course of a year or even the next years.
And I think you also have a customer engagement initiative running for this one. So we already talked about this in one of our last podcasts, but I'll put the link in again if someone else wants to sign up for that.
Yes, definitely. So until I think June 9th, the sign-up period is still open. So customers who want to engage on a deeper level, want to troubleshoot with us also their scenarios, and then also bring their feature requests to us. Please take a look at the customer engagement initiative for SAP Private Link Service.
Cool.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Sven. Thanks, Martin, for joining. A really interesting topic. And we'll see each other again, or some of you, next week in our 100th episode.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah.
Congrats to you.
See you then.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.